we're going to be talking about Isaiah, obviously, but 52, the last three verses in 52 and the whole chapter of 53. And there's really five sets of three-verse little groups in here that we're going to go through. And that's why I was thankful that you didn't do that last week and just said, hey, it's coming, because that last part of 52 is important. Want to also bring out the fact that some of the things that this chapter, or whatever you want to call it, is fulfilling. One of them is that Daniel in 9:24, he said, what are the purpose of the 490 years, the 77s? Okay. And it's really to finish the transgressions of the Jews. And what is the transgression of the Jews? The disbelief that Jesus was the Messiah. Okay. So we're finishing that up. And then also remember that in the last stages of the campaign of Armageddon, at the very end of the tribulation, is the last 3 days. The 2 days here is confession, and we're going to go through the confession of the Jews, and then also then their justification. And so the last 3 days, right before Christ comes back at the second coming, which is at the very end of the tribulation, those 3 days, and that's what's covered in this chapter also. Just want to make that note before I went on. We're talking about today is the suffering and triumph servant. Okay. And so just kind of put it in perspective. And then the servant, we're going to say, like I said, is going to be broken into 5 different parts. We're going to talk about the shocking servant, which is in 52, the end of 52, the sorrowing servant, the smitten servant, the silent servant, and the satisfied servant. Would somebody read verses 13 to 15 and 52?
See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand.
So we're going to that about the first thing is the shocking servant is what it's talking about. It's if you put it in chronological order, it's verse 14, which is his appearance, his exaltation, and his message. Okay. So if we look at verse 14 for a second, his appearance, I'm doing them in chronological order. So 14 is before 13 actually, but consider all that Jesus went through between the time of his arrest and his crucifixion. They say he didn't look a man. His legal rights were taken away, the right to a fair trial, and his human rights were taken away from him. So he was not even treated as a person, let alone a Jewish citizen. In front of Annas, Jesus was slapped. At the hearing before Caiaphas, he was spit upon, slapped, beaten on the head with fists. In front of Pilate, he was scourged. Pilate's soldiers beat him. And it was kind of an interesting comment. The most graphical account of Jesus' suffering in this time is not found in the Gospels, but is found in Psalm 22, 14 to 18. And that's where it describes the horrificness of what was going on. And then we look at, in verse 13, then, the startled servant, okay? What it is he's not startled. The people that are going to see him as he is exalted are going to be startled. They're going to say, if you look back at Isaiah 6, verse 1, it says, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted. That's what Isaiah saw. And now it's saying he's been high and lifted up, greatly exalted. Our song this morning, didn't it say about he was highly lifted up and exalted? I mean, that's over and over throughout the message. This is what's going to happen. The servant suffered and died, but he did not remain dead. What looked to men like a humiliating defeat, okay, was in the eyes of God a great victory. Okay, this was God's plan it was going according to plan in the time frame of his plan at the right location in the plan. The Jews that were believing in him at that time and other people thought the bad guys thought we defeat him. The Jews were saying he's gone. We're all devastated. So if everybody thought it was a defeat, but it was not. It was not a defeat. It was the crowning event of history, really, because everything before that, people looked to that. Then it was defined, and since then we all look back to that. So all of history looks at that one point. Okay, Jesus' body was glorified. He was in heaven, sitting at the right hand of the Father. And in one of our songs this morning is talking about this. He has all authority because everything was put under his feet. There is no one in the universe higher than Jesus. What astonished those who esteemed him in the lowest of low. They did not esteem him at all, but the lowest of lows. And the fact they're going to all see someday who he really is. Okay, it started with his message. It says the people whose mouths dropped open with the astonishment of his humiliation and exaltation will shut their mouths in guilt when they hear his proclamation. Okay, and what's it? Paul interpreted this when Romans, the proclamation is the preaching of the gospel to the Gentile nations. Somebody read Romans 15:20-21.
It has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, so that I would not be building on someone else's foundation. Rather, as it is written, those who were not told about him will see, and those who have not heard will understand.
Now, which is out of Isaiah 52:15, the last verse in this first deal. And he's repeating what was in verse 15 of 52:15. Okay. The gospel is not that Christ died. I mean, Napoleon died. Those are historical points. Okay. The message is that Christ died for our sins. What really capped the Jews is they begin to realize it was not only for their sins, but for
everybody else.
Everybody else. Yeah. Throughout history, and I'm trying to find the first place it was mentioned, but God has told them in the scriptures, go tell the Gentiles. I don't think so. We won't be special if we tell them. So they don't do it. And they did, and now they get to this point here, and they don't want to do it again. Okay? Go tell the world about Christ, right? Says now we see see why people are astonished, startled when they understand the gospel message. This man whom they condemned has declared that they are condemned unless they turn from sin and trust him. That's tough for people to accept. It really is. And it also comes back to that thing, the very first line. You know, you want to be like God, right? We all want to be like God. That's what he put that gene in us to be like God. And I think you got to, there's a key on this. I think you got to overcome that. And that's how you become a Christian. When you overcome that, I'll let him be God. Let him do his thing. I'll do my thing, which is his thing. Okay. And then it says, you cannot rejoice on the good news of salvation until you first had the bad news of condemnation. I remember one morning listening, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, Judy has the radio come on. And I think it was, what was the guy at 5 o'clock? Was it MacArthur or Jeremiah? One of those guys was talking, and he says, how do you preach the gospel to a 5-year-old? You scare the hell out of them. You know, and get them in tears. Once they're in tears, then you can bring them to salvation. You can bring them, but you can show them the path to salvation. There is a way. Okay. But they've got to get to that point first. Otherwise, you know, it's like who was a general that saw, they won a battle and won it real fast. And the guy came and says, wasn't that great? We won the battle real fast. He said, that's terrible. It's horrible. He said, why? He says, they didn't see their mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters laying in the street dead. Until people see things like that, they don't get it. They just miss it.
I will say, I think one of the coolest things in VBS was the day we spent on sin. I think it was you, Sue, that you were talking to some kids, like, how often do you think you have to pray for forgiveness for your sins? And the little boy said, all day. But that was I got it, like,
Yeah.
that was fabulous part of VBS, like, they got it.
That's so cool.
70 times 7.
Every time, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And then in here it says about, in verse 15 it says, thus he will sprinkle many nations. What does that mean to you? What does that sprinkle mean to you? That just means it will be on more nations. More people will catch it. You can go around and dab them with water, hit it in the holy water, but if you sprinkle them, you get a lot more. Okay.
Like the way that NLT uses, he will startle many nations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're going to
It's a
be.
different way of,
What was he saying this morning? You gotta get the alarm. It's got to be out there for him to do that. Okay, let's look at the next set of 3 verses, which is the second one, and this is about his humiliation, the sorrowing servant. Okay. In verse 1, somebody read verses 1 through 3 of 53.
Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem.
Verse 1 says, now we're starting in verses, I'll say right now before I forget, but verses 1 through 9 is the confessional of the Jewish people before God 3 days before the beginning of the end of tribulation. Okay, so they're going to go through 2 days of this confessional. And then once they've done that and realize who Jesus is, then they will be miraculously given the grace to have the faith to be able to be saved. Okay. So verse 1, who has believed our message? We want to report. Here's all this stuff here. Who's believing it? Oh, he's talking about Christ when he comes, but it's 700 years early. Okay, so he's talking about they're not believing the prophets, but they're not going to believe it when it happens either. And I've already told you about Cyrus and all the details. Cyrus came exactly true, and you still don't believe. How am I going to wake you up? That's what that says, really. How am I going to wake you up? My comment was the job of a prophet must have been exhausting.
Yeah.
You stand there and they stand before kings, they stand before people, they tell them all this stuff, and they go, yeah, whatever. And so people blow off. They don't really think, they're not studying. Now, I think, we have so much to our advantage. We have a book that we can read in our time, in our space, in our in our own time frame. They had the scrolls and things that they got read to on the weekend. So the average guy didn't have as much his availability as we do by any stretch of the imagination. So I think it's even more important for us to do things. It says the arm of the Lord, and that's what I'm got up here. The 3 different places. It says in Psalm 83, when God made the universe, he used his finger, he put his arm out, created it. And in Exodus 13:3, when God delivered Israel from Egypt, it was by a strong hand. And then in John 12:37-40, but to save the lost souls, he had to bear his mighty arm. Just on the cross, okay? And then in verse 2, it says, he grew up before him. He grew up in obscurity of men because of his geographical location, Nazareth. I mean, no one like Nazareth. His social status, son of a carpenter, which I'd never thought about before. But he grew up before God, not before men. And this is a Keelonism, but it just made sense at the time. I think it's got a good point. He grew up out of the sight of Satan. Out of the sight of Satan.
Oh.
Satan's trying to kill him all the time. He tried to kill him before the flood. He tried to kill him when he was a baby. He's trying to kill him everywhere. He wants to, if he can't kill him, he's going to kill the Jews. So it's always because he understands that his death, his ending will be in the lake of fire if he doesn't do something. So he's trying to do something. So, 30 years he was left alone. I mean,
fascinating.
Satan didn't notice him. Satan's roaming the earth. He tells God, I'm roaming the earth. I'm looking for your kid. That's why I take that. He's looking for, he didn't find him for 30 years. So God put him out. And we always say, what happened in those the first 12 years and then up to 30 years? What happened? God was hiding him. That's my take on it. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Earlier in Isaiah, he says, I was hidden.
yeah, well, there you go. So, yeah, he's been, but we think how powerful Satan is, and he is. Okay, he can do incredible things, and towards the end, he's going to be doing things that people say, that's got to be God. Only God can do that. But if you don't know the things he can do and he can't do, obviously he can't be everywhere. So you can take somebody and hide them right there in the country. Of course, he didn't know what part of the earth was going to come in, So it was kind of interesting about that. And then it says, out of the root of parched ground, he was not in royalty as expected. This really bumfuzzled him. They also said that, his mom was barren until she had him, one of the commentators said it was expected that he, the Messiah, should have some uncommon beauty in his face and person, and he should charm the eye, attract the hearts, and raise expectation to all that say hints at him. Somebody read John 8:57.
You are not yet 50 years old, they said to him, and you have seen Abraham.
Okay, he's talking about,
Yeah.
I'm with Abraham, and I'm there before him, and they're going, what? Wait a second, you're not even 50 years old. Why would they say that? He's 30 years old.
Yeah.
He had a hard life. He's supposed to be, he must be looking. Oh, we're going to find out how he looks in a minute.
It says Isaiah 49, which isn't too long ago, it says, in the shadow of his hand, he has hidden me, and he has made me a polished shaft. In his quiver, he has hidden me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he is hiding him. And then he comes down here and they're saying, you think of this 30-year-old, we'll see pictures over here in a minute, 30-year-old guy, but he looks 50. They're going, hey, you're not 50, but you look 50, but you're probably not 50. You can't be 50 years old. So a 30-year-old man that looks 50 had a hard life. Okay.
Just one other thing on that timing thing. It is all about timing. There were several instances during his ministry when he literally vanished.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And they could not find him.
Yeah.
So it's obvious that he had that access to where he could disappear.
Because that was God and him working together to make sure his time worked right.
Yes.
Okay. And his time is still going to work right. He does it by circumstances today. He does it by Putin. He does it by Shea. He does it by, he has these guys all around he uses and whispers in their brains and stuff, and they do things. That's just the way it is. This one of the comments from the commentators was the carnal hearts see no excellency in the Lord Jesus, nothing that would induce them to desire an acquaintance with him or be of an interest with him. Elsewhere in the Bible, leaders, usually when they talk about it in the Bible, are usually good looking. It says in Acts 7:20, Moses was born and he was lovely in the sight of God. Okay. In 1 Samuel 16:12, it says, now David was ruddy with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance.
Jerry, I've thought about this a lot. Why didn't Jesus, the most amazing, perfect man, God, ever, but the whole point would be the message would be lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we live it out today. The prom queen, everybody, most leaders in the world look at them. They're either good-looking women or good-looking guys. Judy always likes the quarterbacks. That quarterback's always so good-looking. But that's true. You pick the good-looking ones, okay? God doesn't want us to pick him because of that. Because that's the way he built us. Okay, he built us that way. He says, okay, yeah, fine, that's okay. I don't want him to do that. Okay? So let's look at Jesus. I got my photographs here.
Yeah.
This is one of the Catholic pictures. Okay, you can see. This is the one I had hanging in my house at home. Okay. So what about today? They, and I've thought about this too. The light side, the humorous side of Jesus. Okay. Moments in his life that would be fun. Okay, humorous. It seems reasonable to, in an attempt to get people to come, his apostles. Surely he was not always sorrowful. However, in the letter of Lentulus, and there's a lot of discussion. Go to Winnipeg and you can find it. The guy didn't exist. He did exist. He doesn't exist. All this kind of stuff. But anyway, he sent a letter to the Roman Senate, and it was published it was early on, but it was published in 1500 A.D. Okay, and purports to be written by a Roman official, a contemporary of Jesus, and gives a physical description of Jesus. The letter may have influenced how Jesus was later physically depicted in art. Okay. And the comment was, he is never known to laugh. Later on, if you read the letter, I read the letter. It says, he's also the most beautiful among children of men. Duh. The description we're going to find out in a minute is not beautiful, not good looking even. But never known to laugh is one of the things. I've often thought of him, well, maybe he had some comical moments in his life, but maybe not.
No way that all those little children that came to him, that he wasn't smiling.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I agree.
yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I still, even though that letter was lightweight, and whether it's true or not, who knows? I still believe that I see him with smiling at times. I mean, you watch The Chosen, you can see he's smiling.
I do believe so. Yeah, I think he did. I'm like you. I think he had fun with his disciples. Like, I think
He probably had a hoot on some of the things he was trying to tell them. They're going, oh. But then now we could bring up the movies, and the movies start showing serious Jesus, okay? Because he had a serious job to do, right? So he was serious. But then we go to people that say, oh, no, what did he look like? And the little girl that died or whatever she did and came back and says, I painted a picture of him. So this is the picture of Jesus. Yeah. So this is the latest deal. He's a kind of an average looking guy, and then they've really cast him well and everything else. But I got to talk with John. I said, John, I said, that's not the description they're going to call him here. He's, they said, appearance that we should not be attracted to him. He is not and all these guys have some strength about them. So I said, John, give me a picture. And so I said, okay, give me one. So he goes, okay. Here's Jesus, and he put the face, and this is hard. Tell him what you had to do, John. Yeah, but he put the face of an average guy.
Yeah, the big guy.
An average, so give me the face of it, because he had the picture like this of Jesus, but give me an AI picture of Jesus, and they gave him the picture of that other guy's face on there. No, I said, no, John, he doesn't look that good. He says, okay, so give me an average face and put on him. So, okay, so he did that. And I said, well, then I read the deal about him being 50 years old. I said, no, that's probably not a good idea. So let's give him another picture. Let's make him a little portly, make him a little older, shorter, even AI can't draw an unkingly king. Nobody, people all over the world, when they see him, in their mind, as they reject him, see him as a powerful person. As he is, yeah, because God's put that in us, right? I think he's put that in us to where and you can't unsee this stuff. And then it comes down to verse 3, and that and there was a man of sorrows. His condition on earth was sorrowful. He was unsettled. He had no home to lay his head. He lived by alms and he was oppressed and menaced his whole life. Well, the part we know about anyway. The part he was out of hiding. He concealed his glory and majesty and drew a veil over it. Therefore, he was despised and not esteemed, because we could not see through the veil. Christ undertook to make satisfaction to the justice of God for the sin of men. He did this by divesting himself of the glories due an incarnate deity and by submitting himself to the disgraces due the worst of men. Thus vilifying himself, he glorified his Father. You're not going to be able to see it. Can't see God's face either. But you can't see it until you get to heaven. I mean, they saw it. He was not a handsome guy. He had nothing to attract anybody to him. Just what he said did. Now, I'm going to go to the next slide. And I started going through it and I can't not say, why did the Jews not believe all this stuff? Well, this is their understanding of this deal. It says, it describes the servant as rejected, despised, and unrecognized. That's right. Jews understand this as a reflection of Israel's history of being scorned and looked down upon by other nations. Towards the end, I'll go through a little discussion about how they go from Jesus as a servant to Israel is a servant. When they talk about the servant, when the Jews talk about servant today, they're talking about the nation of Israel. Okay, this servant that he's talking about here is Jesus. Okay, but they don't see that from the very first part of that. They don't see that. And I'll show you some other things why in a minute. Then we also look at his expiation. That's the atonement, if you will, of a smitten servant. This is the third of the three verses. Somebody read verses 4 through 6.
Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
So these three verses is I guess the meat or the heart of 53. 53 is the heart of the Bible, really, in terms of the gospel message, which is an innocent servant, Jesus Christ, dying as a sacrifice for our sins. That's the message. People cannot understand that. Okay, Jews especially, because their hearts are hardened, and they'll be that way until the last 3 days of tribulation. That's just the way it is. Not every Jew will be hardened the whole time. I'm just saying we have the opportunity, if you know Jews and talk to them, to try to explain this, and I'll show you some things about that in a minute too. Okay, so in verse 4, Jesus is talking about the surely your griefs himself bore and the sorrows he carried. In fact, I'm going to read that 8:14-17 real quick. We got time.
When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law laying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. When the evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases.
Yeah. Remember that the most quoted Old Testament chapter or book in the New Testament is Isaiah. Okay, it's throughout the New Testament, Isaiah is the one that's quoted the most. Okay, because he's telling things that are going to happen soon, they're going to happen during Christ's time, and then they're going to happen again during the millennium. Okay, during the millennial reign. And then in verse 5 it says he was pierced through and crushed under the weight. The burden that he was under is our iniquities, and the sin is a burden that grows heavier the longer we resist. And in 30, it also talks about his transgressions, our transgressions, with transgressions of the rebellion against God. One of the commentaries said, by choice we are children of disobedience. That's in Ephesians 2:2. And by nature we are born of wrath, which is Ephesians 2:3. And in John 10:1-18, it talks about under the law of Moses, sheep died for the shepherd. Under grace, the good shepherd died for the sheep. Okay.
That's an interesting point because a thought came to my mind here. The previous manifestations of God's power to the Israelites were for the general people. But this was a very personal Savior.
Yeah.
The miracles were very personal.
Yeah.
They were not deliver us from Rome. So
Right.
the experience they had with God's power was more corporate than it was personal.
Right.
And I can see how some of that would filter into how can we believe this is the Messiah? Because, but then you start to see him raise people from the dead, and
Right.
you gotta wonder.
So then the Jewish understanding is that the servant bears the suffering of others. This is interpreted as Israel bearing the brunt of the world's hatred and sins, not because of the Israel deserved, but because of the injustices inflicted upon him. There's the error. They thought they were innocent, and they were being punished throughout all this for whatever reason. In fact, they're being punished for their not believing and not complying with God's rules. I mean, he told them, don't plow over 7 years. They never did it. They always plowed. From the very beginning. They always were complaining about, and they still are. And then it says in that the nations eventually recognized that Israel suffered undeservedly. That's what the feeling is. Let's go on real quick. Resignation, the silent servant. Somebody read 7 to 9.
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent. So he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich it is death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth.
Okay, I'm going to go back really quick on the last. In verse 5, it says, he was crushed for our iniquities. The Jews, I've got to say this, they think it's not for, but of his their iniquity. So there was this right here, so they say, the Christians changed that word so that it sounds like that he died for us. And they take that word out because they don't want it to be that way. Okay, so verse 7, back then, I guess even now, servants were not permitted to talk back, to their master or the mistress, whatever. Jesus was silent before Caiaphas. Jesus was silent before the chief priest and elder. He was silent before Pilate. He was silent before Herod Antipas, and he was silent before the soldiers that mocked and beat him. One of the comments I was trying to verify this with the silence. This silence so impressed the Ethiopian treasurer that when who was it? Philip went and saw him, he was reading Isaiah 53, 7 and 8. And so that impressed that guy, and he was, I want to know what's going on. He was silent while undergoing suffering. He was silent when illegally tried and condemned to death, compared to a lamb going to slaughter. He died as a criminal among criminals. And if he really was a criminal, because they said he's going to die as a criminal among criminals, and here he's going to be not, he's going to be among the rich. If he was a criminal, they would just thrown in a pile, let him rot.
Yeah.
They don't bury him. They're nobody. They're not people. But in fact, he was, and then prophecy was fulfilled when he died in a rich man's grave, buried. His burial was there, so showing he really died. Okay. Point of all that. And Jewish, their understanding of this, he was silently and is oppressed without protest. This corresponds to exotic, stoic endurance of Jesus through the centuries. Persecutions in exile, pogroms, and the Holocaust. Do you know what a pogrom is? I looked that one up. These are organized massacres of a particular ethnic group, and in particular that the Jewish people in Russia and Eastern Europe in the late 19th and 20th centuries. I'll mention some of the names here in a minute, but they've been oppressed always. Not just because, but because of God's trying to wake them up. He's sending locusts.
He's sending locusts.
He sent locusts. Just send them. I'm talking about these guys. Well, they're his people. He sent locusts to other people. He just send locusts. He didn't need that. He's going to send them, let them know what's going on. Okay, let's go to the last one here real quick. Vindication, the silent servant. Somebody read 10 through 12.
Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors.
That last part is talking about the thief on the cross. Okay, but so let's look at this. Isaiah now explains the cross from God's point of view. Jesus' death was determined before this time. Didn't happen that way. God determined it that way. He was not a martyr, nor was his death an accident. In it says he will see his offspring in verse 10. You know what that means? That's kind of an interesting thing. I thought, wow. And the commentary is saying to die childless was a grief and shame to Jews, but Jesus gave birth to a spiritual family because of his actions on the cross. So he didn't die childless. Okay, that was one of the things that was kind of interesting. They would have caught that. It's not something we would actually catch. And he will see it and be satisfied. Jesus satisfied God's heart. His death also satisfied the law of God, the propitiation. Okay. God is angry at sin because it offends his holiness and violates his holy law. In his holiness, in his holiness, he must judge sinners. But in his love, he desires to forgive them. God cannot ignore sin or compromise it, for it would be contrary to his own nature and law. Jesus is pictured as the mercy seat where God's holy demands are satisfied. How did God solve this problem? The judge, Jesus, took the place of the criminals and made the just demands on his own holy law. Okay, so he solved his own law. That's how he got it. That's how he was able to save us. Grace is love that has paid a price, and sinners that are saved by grace. Justice can only condemn the wicked and justify the righteous, but grace justifies the ungodly when they trust Jesus. And then in verse 12 it says, numbered with transgressors and intercede for transgressors. That was a thief on the cross. So the Jewish understanding of this, the servant is ultimately vindicated and rewarded by God. God acknowledges Israel's suffering and promises redemption, restoration, and honor. Yes, in the millennium, not now. They wanted it right then. They were expecting a king on a white horse with an army and conquering Romans. It has nothing to do with Rome. That's not, yes.
Sure, there's solid historical evidence that prior to the birth of Jesus and shortly after his death, that the Jews believe that Isaiah 53 referred to Messiah.
Let's look at some things. This is kind of an interesting comment. Can't maybe read all of it. It says, but what he's talking about is the suffering, saving servant, which is who Jesus was. And look at B. It's 10 acts of the Savior. He bore our griefs, carried our sorrows, pierced for our aggressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was a chastisement that brought us peace. With his wounds we are healed. The Lord was laid on him, the iniquity of us all. Stricken for the transgression of my people. Small letter my, I think it's Isaiah talking there. My people shall bear their iniquities, yet he bore the sin of many. Point of view of the suffering. If I can show this to you. There's a suffering servant in Isaiah 700 BC, and they say there's 5 different parts of this prophecy. One is Isaiah. Now, he got sawed in half later on. I've forgotten that part, but he gets killed. Okay, and then he goes to what they call the Old Testament martyrs, which the suffering servants. These are who the suffering servant could be. It's currently, right here, then it's down here with Isaiah. Then he goes to the Old Testament martyrs, and all those guys are there. Then they also say it's Jesus. Then they say, well, then it also jumps to Paul because he was, and then it goes down to all Christians. It's time.
You get a minute left.
Yeah, a minute left.